Okay, so welcome everyone to this webinar about how you can automate PHP performance testing with Blackfyre. I'm very happy to be with you today. So let's start now. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is how users behave on a website. That's the maximum number of seconds people are able to wait on a website before going away. And most of the time, that's forever, which means that if your websites are not fast enough, you're going to lose customers and also revenue if you are an e-commerce website, of course. And that's why performance optimization is key to success. So the faster your website is, the better it is for the revenue. So the question is, how do you make sure that the new version of your web app will not be slower, or you can make it faster than the existing one? And the problem nowadays is that this is very difficult to achieve because developers do not have the right tools. And that's one of the goals with Blackfyre, giving you all the tools you need to actually be sure that the next version of your web apps is going to be faster than the current one. Why is it so important? That's very important because solving a performance issue in development is quite cheap, right? Nothing is in production yet, so it is very easy to change the code to fix issues. No brainer, really. But then, if you find a performance problem in the staging environment or in the testing environment, it costs a bit more. And of course, if you find a problem once it reaches production, it costs a lot, right? Because you have deployed the application, which means that you need to understand the problem in production. You need to quickly find a fix, which is not always easy. Then you need to deploy again. So it can take a lot of time, a lot of stress for developers. So if you can find a way to fix performance problems before the code goes to production, that's better. And that's why we decided to work on Blackfyre and start working on Blackfyre a year ago. So Blackfyre, of course, is one solution that you can use for performance testing. This is a solution that can be used by developers, but also DevOps. And Blackfyre is easy to measure, understand, compare, and improve code performance. Moreover, Blackfyre helps to improve application performance at each step of the application lifecycle, right? So you can use Blackfyre in your development environment. So we have a profiler that you can use to debug performance problem, to find bottlenecks as well in development environments. And then we also have, and we're going to talk about that today, you can write performance tests with Blackfyre so that you can integrate Blackfyre into your continuous integration platform so that you can test the performance of your apps, that you can validate the performance is good enough so that you can decide to actually deploy the code in production. And of course, it's also very important to have Blackfyre in production as well, because the traffic is not the same, the servers are not the same, the data are not the same, which means that the performance can be slightly different and the code behavior can be very different from what you can get on your development machines. So Blackfyre in production is a great way to monitor issues, to identify problems, and to understand what's going on. Okay, and that's so when we started Blackfyre a year and a half ago, we only had the development story, right? So Blackfyre was mainly a profiler, mainly useful for developers on their personal laptops. Version 2, released a month ago, goes further than that, and now we have a solution that you can use in all your environments: development, testing, staging, and production. So, and that's possible because you can write performance tests, assertions on performance metrics, really. Of course, everything relies on the profiler behind the scene. But here, because we have a deep understanding on your code and behavior at runtime, we know which library you are using. If you're using Symfony or Magento or Drupal or plain PHP, PDO, whatever you're using, we know that because we have all the function calls called in your code. So the first step is the code. That's why you need to install a small PHP extension on your servers, and that's the only thing that you need to do to be able to write performance tests. And then you can write things that you can see on the screen. So for instance, I can say, I don't want the word clock time, so the time it takes for PHP to actually render a page. I don't want this time to be more than 300 milliseconds, for instance. Or I don't want the network out so that the response size to be more than half a megabyte. Things like that. So test on time, on network, memory, so all the main dimensions of a profile, but also on very specific things that are the behavior of the website itself. So for instance, if you have a look at the right side of the slide, right in the middle, you can see that I have an assertions trying to check the number of SQL queries executed for this page. And you can see that I don't want more than 5 such queries on a page. And as you can see here on the page, I have all assertions actually passed. They are green, and you can see the actual numbers in gray. So for instance, here I have 3 SQL queries for this page, and the allowed number is 5, so that's fine. So that's one way to have a look at the performance of your website for any given page, for any given HTTP call. You can write tests depending on which library you are using. So you can write assertions on SQL statements. You can write assertions on the number of templates rendered by PHP, or whether there is an email sent synchronously, which is not a good idea in production, of course, or the number of sub-processes executed, or the number of HTTP requests. We have a large number of metrics that you can use in your assertions. So those variables are built in. You don't need to do anything to have access to them. But of course, if you have some specific frameworks, not open sourced ones, or if we missed one for the library that you are using, you can also write your own variables based on your own usage, and then use those variables in your test as well. Okay, so that's the first step, and the way you can write those tests is just by creating a small .blackfyre.yml file directly in your repository, so that the performance tests are actually near the code, which means that whenever you are adding a new feature, or whenever you fix a performance bug, you can also write some assertions to be sure that you won't have any regressions. And the fact that we store the Blackfyre.yml file directly in your repository means that you can have different versions depending on the pull request and different branches. So you can have one Blackfyre.yml file for your current version deployed on production, but a different one for the next version, for instance. The way it works is that when you deploy your code, you also deploy the .blackfyre.yml file, and then whenever there is a profile, we're going to talk about automation of profiling later on, but whenever you trigger a profile, we're going to get the Blackfyre.yml file on your server and then execute all the assertions, all the tests that are. Okay. So assertions is a great way to be sure that you don't have any performance regression, but that's also a great way to set expectations on what you expect on your website. So you can say for all the web pages, I don't want any web page to take more than 100 milliseconds to be rendered by PHP. So the performance test that you can write can be on specific HTTP request, or for all HTTP requests. So you can set your own expectation for all the libraries that you are using on your website. So being able to get a sense of the performance of one HTTP request is great, but then it's also a great if you can, and that's possible with Blackfyre, the fact that you can see the evolution of the performance from one version to the next one, or from the performance of the master branch to the performance of a pull request, where you add a lot of features can probably impact the performance of your app. So the way we can do that is with specific functions, and you can see that under the pages should not become slower part of the screen, where we assert on the evolution of the performance. So here, the first one says that we don't want the newest version of the code to be slower by 30% compared to the current version. And the same goes for any variable. So we can also say that I don't want to have more than 2 additional queries, SQL queries, for the newest version of the website compared to the old one. And that's great because, you know, sometimes you add a new feature and the performance decrease is not that big. But then you add another one, you have a small decrease again, and then another one, a small decrease again, which means that if you don't take care of the evolution of performance, at some point you can have big differences. You are in production, and then it's much more complex to debug and to fix that. So if you can find those problems before merging a pull request, for instance, or even before the testing or staging environment, that's much better. Okay, so those performance tests are executed whenever you profile an HTTP request from the browser, from the console as well. But of course, being able to automate that is the next step, and that's probably what you want to do on production servers. For that, we have test scenarios. So a scenario is a set of pages, a set of HTTP requests. I'm talking about pages here, but I think it's better to talk about HTTP requests because Blackfyre can be used for a website, but also for web services, APIs, for mobile apps, and things like that. So for a scenario is really a chain of HTTP requests that you want to test from time to time, or based on some events, right? So, for instance, whenever you deploy a new version of the code on production servers, you want to trigger a set of scenarios to be sure that the performance is stable enough. And the same goes for the continuous integration servers. So whenever you push a new pull request on your Jenkins servers, you want to run all the scenarios to be sure that performance is fast enough. And then, depending on the results of the profiles, you have a report. That's what you see on the screen, on the right side of the screen. The report tells you for each scenario all the results for assertions. So you can see green ones and red ones. And then, if you have some red flags, you can have access to the profile to understanding on why things are getting slower, for instance. Okay, so whenever you deploy, you can trigger that. We have a very simple mechanism to do that. We have a webhook that you can configure. So that's just a small HTTP post that you trigger on our server. I'm going to demonstrate that later on so that you can understand how it works. You can also have scheduled builds, which means that every hour or every day, whatever, that's a configuration that you can set. You can trigger all the scenarios and then have some notifications. So we have a bunch of notifiers, so you can have a notification by email if something is getting slower, on Slack, or even we also have an integration with GitHub, for instance. So you can integrate Blackfyre and GitHub with the scenarios so that whenever the scenarios are red, you have a red status on GitHub for the pull request, which is a great way to be sure that you never merge a pull request before performance is good enough. Okay, so that's the new things that we have in version 2 of Blackfyre. But of course, when you have a performance problem, you need to understand how you can fix it, right? If something is getting slower, if you have many SQL statements executed on a page or many web services calls, you need to understand the problems, which means that then you need to dig deeper, and that's when you need to have a look at the call graphs, right? So that's the profiler part of Blackfyre. So the call graph is a great way to understand exactly why your test failed. So the toolbar at the top of the screen is about the main numbers, so the work log time, the I/O, the CPU time, the memory, the network, and so on. And then the call graph is a representation of the execution of your code, so that's all the function calls. And on the left side, you have all the functions that were called during your HTTP request. And that's a great way to better understand what's going on. So the way we can do that is on the call graph, for instance. So if you have a look at the red nodes, that's the one you want to have a look at first, because those nodes are the ones that actually consumed most of the resources. So it can be the memory or the network, the work log time, depending on the dimension you are working on. And then you have also the critical path, which is where your application is spending most of the time. So that's probably where you can also have a look at all those nodes to see where you can improve things. I'm not going to talk too much about how you can read and interpret a call graph. It would take too much time. But you can have a look at the 24 days of Blackfyre data tutorial that we published during December last year, where we explain in great details how you can read such a call graph and how you can interpret the results and how you can then use this knowledge to actually fix bottlenecks. Right. Okay, so having a look at one call graph is a great way to find bottlenecks and trying to fix the problems. But of course, when you change the code and expect a better performance, you need to check that you actually fix the problems. Important because sometimes we think that we actually fix the problem, but there is a regression somewhere else. So if you do not check that you actually fix the problems, well, that's not how it works. So the thing is, after fixing the problem, you can take another profile and compare, and that's a unique feature of Blackfyre, being able to compare two different profiles, really understand if your fix actually fixed the problems, right? So here on the screen, as you can see, the UI is almost the same, but now we are having a look at the difference between two different profiles, two different versions of the code and the performance of each other ones. So you can see here that the page is actually slower. We have a lot of red, so red means slower, blue means faster, and then again in the function list you can see the function calls that were executed more. So the get words function here was called much more in the newest version of the code. So there is a regression somewhere, and we need to find a way to actually fix that. Okay. So if you have any questions anytime, please ask the questions. I'm going to answer them at the end of the presentations. Feel free to ask any questions, really. So we have several versions of Blackfyre. There's a free version, which is basically the profiler tool. So if you are a user of XedPro, for instance, or Xdebug for the profiling part of Blackfyre, of Xdebug, sorry. Blackfyre is a replacement for those tools. The big advantage of Blackfyre is that configuration is much easier, installation is much easier than those tools who provide a lot of integration with a lot of different tools. The other difference is that we have support for many different PHP versions from 5.3 to 5.6, and we also have support for PHP 7. It's not available right now, but we are going to announce that probably early next week. So that's the first profiler available for PHP 7, which is great. And last but not the least, Blackfyre does not have any overhead when you are not profiling HTTP request, which means that you can deploy Blackfyre on production servers with confidence because there is no overhead, so there is no impact on the performance on your users, the regular ones, right? But of course, whenever you take a profile, whenever you run performance tests, then we add an overhead, but that's not something that we had on user requests, but on specific requests for tests. Then all the features related to collaborations, team managements, environments, and automations are part of our paid plan. So we have a premium edition and an enterprise one. So you can have a look online on the pricing page, and we have a lot of information about details on the differences between the plan. But we have a free plan, and that's great for your development environments and on your personal laptop to be able to find bottlenecks. Okay, I think it's time for a small demo. Now I'm going to switch to my browser. Okay, let's go. So this is the Blackfyre. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So this is the dashboard where I can have a look at all the main information for my account. Here you can see all the latest profiles I've made, some on symfony.com, and here another website on the GitList demo. So that's where we store all your profiles, and that's also a big difference with existing tools. We store all the profiles for you. We keep them around so that even if you deploy only every 2 months, for instance, you can keep the profiles of the current version of your website so that you can compare them later on. So that's a very important feature of Blackfyre. And then on the left side, I have the environments. So an environment is where I can collaborate with people on a specific website, a specific project, really. So I have one for Blackfyre, I have one for Sensulabs inside here, for my open source projects, for Sensulabs and Symfony.com. So you organize your environments the way you want. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate how to work with Blackfyre with GitList. GitList is a PHP open source project. It lets you browse Git repositories. So this is the Twig one here, basic interface here. The first way you can use Blackfyre to profile an app is using the Chrome extension. So I've installed the Blackfyre Chrome extension here. And just click on profile. That's it, right? Just by clicking on profile, I'm going to ask Blackfyre to take a profile of the current page in the browser. As you can see, it takes some time because we actually take several samples so that we can get more accurate results. And that's also a key feature of Blackfyre. If you take only one sample, one request, if you instrument just one request, you can have very different results from 2 runs, even if the code is exactly the same. So being able to take several profiles for the same page, then aggregate the results, you get more accurate results, and it's much easier to reason about the numbers. So here, directly in the browser, you have a summary, right? So I can see the world clock time, the CPU time, the memory, the network, HTTP request, so web service calls or API calls, and SQL statements. You can see I have a red flag here, a red cross, because, as I said before, all the assertions are also run whenever you ask for a profile. And here you can see that I have 2 checks that are that failed actually. Then, if I want to get more information, I can click on View Profile, and now I have the call graph here, and the big difference with XHProf is that this is an interactive call graph, and that works with very big apps with thousands of calls as well. It works really well, which is not the case with XHProf. And then immediately I can see that I have a problem here, right? The big red node, stream select. Stream select is a PHP function, so I can't optimize that. So I can move on or move up here. I can see this is the process component from Symfony, so I can't optimize that. So I can have a look above, and then at some point I can see here getter client get version. That's from my code, and I can see that the get version is called 10 times, and that's probably too much, right? The version is not going, the Git client version is not going to change within one HTTP version, so we can probably cache this and avoid all those calls to the sub-processes, right? So I'm not going to write the patch, but let's say that I have the patch available, and this URL is actually the same git list code with the patch applied, right? So now I'm going to take another profile, again, so that I can actually compare the performance of the master branch and the newest version with the patch applied. As you can see, we can see that the code is actually faster. If we click on View Profile, we will see something a bit different probably, but that's not really easy to understand if the code is actually faster or slower, right? So that's why the best way is to actually compare 2 different profiles. That by going back to dashboard and then compare the first one with the second one, for instance. As you can see, it is actually much faster, 30% faster, which is great. And here you can see where we actually were able to increase the performance of the code. And stream select is exactly what we expected, so that's great. There is another way to do that, and that's with what we call reference profiles. So what we can say is here, I want to create a new reference because that's the baseline, so I want to keep this profile around for a longer period of time. You can give it a name, for instance, twig page, whatever. Then when you want to compare the new version, you can just select this reference that we've just created and click on Profile. And now Blackfyre knows that you want to compare the reference one to the new one, and immediately you have access to the comparison numbers. And if you click on View comparison, then you have directly the comparison between the 2 versions of the code. So that's very useful. Okay, so here I'm demonstrating how to use Blackfyre from the browser, but of course you can do that from the console as well. So we have, I'm not going to do a lot here, but just a quick overview. So we have a Blackfyre command line that you can use to profile any HTTP request, so you can do the exact same thing. So here I'm going to profile the exact same URL like this, Blackfyre curl, and it's going to do the exact same thing, but from the command line. So that's a great way to profile AJAX requests, API calls, web services, things like that. As you can see, I also have a summary, the assertions, and the main numbers, and a link to the profile here. And that's also a great way to run and to profile command line tools. So here I'm going to profile an hello world like this. So any PHP script can be profiled from the command line. So that's also true for daemons, for consumers. So any PHP code can be profiled with the command line interface. Okay. Now, everything I've talked about right now in the demonstration is things that you can do on your development laptop, right? So here, I forgot to mention something here. When you are on a profile, you also have access to assertions, right? So I have a .blackfyre.yml file in my project. So you can see here the numbers and the assertions, and some are red, some are green. And if I have a look also at the new one after the fix, let's do that very quickly. This one. Okay, I don't have the assertions there. Okay, anyway. Okay, so those assertions, as I said before, can be run whenever you want, and you probably want to automate that. So that's great that they are actually run whenever you take a profile, but you want to automate that. So if you want to automate that in the testing environment, so on Jenkins, you can use a webhook. So we have a lot of different triggers. So here I'm going to go to the settings for the Blackfyre Demo team, and I have some triggers. So the first one I want to talk about is the webhook. And the webhook is just a call to a URL here on our platform. And there are a bunch of things that you can configure here. So you can give a title, some configuration. I'm going to talk about external IDs afterwards. And then whenever you want to trigger a profile, you just use this HTTP call. So here I can simulate that with the trigger button here, which is doing the exact same thing as the curl post I've just mentioned. So it's going to take some time because, of course, Blackfyre needs to call all those pages, take several samples, aggregate the results, run all the assertions. So it's going to take perhaps a minute or two to finish. No, it was quite fast. And then you have the report, right? If I have a notifier configured, I could have had an email or a notification on Slack or things like that, right? And then if I want to understand why this one is too slow, then I can click on Show Profile and I have access to the call graph and functions and so on. So as I said, so that's great if you want to integrate Blackfyre into your continuous integration workflow. Another trigger that is quite interesting, perhaps more for production, is scheduled build. So I can say I want to run my assertions every hour. This is the endpoint, so that's probably the production URL here, and that's all. And then, of course, if you have scheduled builds, you probably want to have some notifiers. So notifiers here, I have Slack and email. So I'm not. So I'm going to switch to another team because I'm not an administrator on this one. Which is a shame, really. Blackfyre.io notifiers. Okay, so we have email, GitHub, HipChat, Slack, and webhook again. So you can also integrate Blackfyre into your own. If that makes sense for you. So GitHub, how can you do that? So here you reference your GitHub repository. You give us a token so that we can actually post some statuses on GitHub pull request. And the way it works is that, let's go back to the webhook trigger here. Here, when you trigger this webhook, external ID is for GitHub is actually the SHA-1 of the commit, and parent ID is the master branch SHA-1, right? And then Blackfyre is going to be able to see if you already have the parent ID, the master branch. And if that's the case, it's going to run the evolution assertion as well. And then, because it knows the SHA-1 of your commit, it is able to actually post a status on your pull request. So that's very easy to achieve. There's another way to do that. So you can do the webhook with curl like this, but everything I've just talked about, so everything you can do with the interface and the webhook, you can do the exact same thing with the API. So we have an API. We also have a PHP SDK, and you can use the PHP SDK to actually trigger those webhooks. And the SDK is also a great way to write performance tests directly into your PHP unit test suite. So that's also something that you can do. We have a lot of documentation about that. So if you click on docs here, you have access to documentation, 24 days of Blackfyre. That's the one the tutorial I've talked about before. And then a lot of things about integration. So if I click here on PHP unit, you will see how you can integrate Blackfyre into PHP unit directly, which is a great way to do that. And so you don't need to do that with a .blackfyre.yml file. You can directly use PHP objects to define your assertions like that, right? And they're going to be run in the exact same way as the ones declared in .blackfyre.yml. Of course, those are not going to be run in production. So you need PHP unit integration and the .blackfyre.yml file. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop talking because I can talk about Blackfyre for hours really. There are so many things, so many features, so many integrations. So hopefully you have a better understanding about how you can integrate Blackfyre into your own workflow. And I'm going to go back to the keynote. Yeah, okay. I suggest if you're interested in Blackfyre, we are adding new features every week, really. So and we post a lot of posts on our blog, so you can subscribe on blog.blackfyre.io to get the latest and upcoming features. That's where we're going to be P7 support next week. If you want to try the premium edition, you can do so by using the webinar 0116 coupon to get 1 free month of Blackfyre. That's a great way to actually test automation, webhooks, integration with PHP unit, and so on. And now, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. I would be more than happy to answer your questions. So the first question is there an integration with SensorLabs Insights? That's a good question. We are thinking about that. So that's quite difficult to answer because without talking about the next features that we are working on. So I'm going to talk a bit about what we are working on right now. So Blackfyre right now is a great tool for developers, hardcore developers really. But we are working on trying to give you automatic recommendations, right? Because we know that you are using Doctrine, because we know that you are using Symfony or Magento or Drupal, whatever, we can tell you how you can optimize the performance of your app very easily. Or for common problems, we can probably help you without you having to have a look at the call graph. So the next version of Blackfyre, or version 3 if you want to call that version 3 of Blackfyre, is going to be about recommendations so that you won't even have to have a look at the call graph. We will tell you directly that you can optimize the performance by doing this or that. And whenever we will be able to do that, it will be very easy or much easier to integrate Blackfyre with SensorLabs Insights. So to answer the question, yes. So no, there is no integration right now with SensorLabs Insight, but we're going to have one at some point later this year, probably. Okay. So the next question is about open source libraries using Blackfyre to improve the performance of their code. Okay, so as I said before, the profiler is free, so that's why all those tools can use Blackfyre. On a side note, if you are a developer for an open source project, we also have free enterprise editions plans for open source projects. So if you want one, just send me an email, Fabien@blackfyre.io, and I can give you an account if you are, a developer for an open source PHP library. So right now, I think most of them are using Blackfyre as a profiler. So like you are using Xedprof or Xdebug nowadays, they are using Blackfyre because it's much more easier to use Blackfyre, and also because Blackfyre give them more insight about how they can optimize their code. I don't think they are profiling the unit tests. I think they are writing scenarios of usage, and they are profiling the typical usages. I can talk for myself, so I've optimized Sami, which is one of my open source projects, which is an API generator, and I've optimized the code a lot just by profiling the command line tool. So it really depends on the libraries we are talking about. I know that some of them are definitely using the unit test, vast majority of them. So it really depends, I think. So the next question is about Docker. Okay, I've not talked about Docker. Sorry about that, but we have an integration with Docker. So if you have a look at documentation, installation, you will see that we have a lot of different integration and a lot of different instructions depending on how you deploy your code. So we have instruction for Debian, Red Hat, Mac, Windows, FreeBSD, manual installation, so you just download the binaries, platform as a service, and then we also have integration with Docker. So that works really well. Again, I'm not going to talk about that because we have full documentation about how you can do that. So just go to the docs and you will see how it's done. I also want to mention that for the enterprise version of Blackfyre, we have an on-premise version that works with Docker as well. So if you are a big company, if you don't want to use a SaaS service, we also have an on-premise version. So send me an email if you are interested in that. Okay, so the next question is about how to profile API calls. So you can profile API calls directly from the command line here. So if I say Blackfyre curl, then I have all the curl options really. So I can say I want to post like this, and then I want to add a header, whatever, content type, whatever, application JSON, and then the URL, which is API dot something. So that's how you can profile APIs. You can also add assertions on APIs in your .blackfyre.yaml file. That also works. And if you want to learn more, in the 24 days of Blackfyre, there is a chapter on how you can profile APIs. I don't remember which one it is. This one, where we are talking about how you can profile APIs. Yeah. Okay. The next one is out-of-the-box solution for GitLab CI or multi-runners. Not really, not for now, because the webhook, I think the webhook is universal and it works for everyone. At some point, we might add some out-of-the-box solution for popular platforms. that's not the case right now. So what we have is we do have integration with, but that's a bit different. That's when you deploy on production servers. But we have integration with Puppet, with Chef, with tools like that. But right now we do not have integration with continuous integration servers or platforms. That's not the case. But that's probably also something that can be the community, and that's the case for a lot of tools. For instance, the Puppet or Ansible integration are actually done by the community directly. Okay, any other questions? I think I've answered most of them. Okay. API. Oh, okay, there is another one. This one is very interesting. So how can you profile an API call from an API call? So you have an API call, and this API call actually calls some other API. So you do have some level of information because we give you all the HTTP requests that are called during an HTTP call, which means that on the call graph here, so here I don't have any calls, but let's say that this is an API call. I would have all the API calls from this one. What we can't do right now is to propagate the fact that you also want to profile those additional HTTP requests. But what you can do is then, if there is one that is really too slow, you can just copy and paste the information there directly on the command line to take a profile of these specific API calls.